On this channel, we reviewed 5 methods of capital punishment and multiple inmates who met their fates with them. I'm wondering what it would be like to be on death row. I'm not talking about the months or years spent waiting for the day to come, but the actual minutes right before everything goes dark. In this video, we're going to walk alongside Mary O'Brien Farmer as she took her final steps to the electric chair. Hello and welcome. My name is Janine, and in this video I promise to give you goosebumps and maybe possibly a little anxiety as we take a walk down the mile. But first, hit that subscribe button before we reach our final destination. You are watching Now You Know. Mary O'Brien was born in Ireland in 1878. Life in Ireland was not exactly easy during this time. The potato famine was officially over by 1852, but the impact of it rippled throughout the country for centuries. Mary was just one of the many millions of Irish men and women who seeked a better life elsewhere. In 1900, Mary stepped foot on American soil, eventually settling in Buffalo, New York, not far from Niagara Falls. It was there where she met and fell in love with a sailor named James Farmer. The couple eventually got married and moved to Jefferson County, New York, where James took a job at a local paper mill. Shortly after the move, Mary and James welcomed a baby boy into the family. They named him Peter. Life was normal. It had its ups and downs, of course, but for the most part, it was considered average. But Mary didn't want average. She didn't want to settle for the little house her and James lived in. She was sick and tired of money always being tight because of the rent that needed to be paid. She wanted bigger and better. Mary couldn't help but feel envious of her own landlord, Sarah Brennan. Not only did Sarah have a beautiful 2-story house, but Sarah also did not have to worry about money. You see, she lived a very comfortable life off of the rent from Mary, in addition to her husband's paycheck. He was a fireman at the local paper mill. Every day, Mary would look out the window from her tiny home, and she would see Sarah's beautiful house, and she would think how nice it would be to live there, rent-free. And then Mary devised a plan. On October 31st, 1907, Mary stepped into the county clerk's office in Watertown, New York. But Mary wasn't Mary. You see, she was pretending to be Sarah on this Halloween day. She walked in and informed the clerk that Mary and James Farmer had purchased her 2 properties for the amount of $2,100, and she needed the proper documents to transfer the deeds into their names. A few moments later, the documents were signed, Sarah's signature being a forgery, of course. The deeds now showed Mary and James Farmer to be the owners of both properties. The only problem was Sarah and Patrick still lived in the house. So Mary's first order of business, now that she was a property owner, was to start the eviction process, or at least her version of one. On April 23, 1908, Patrick returned home from work. He expected to be greeted by Sarah with supper waiting for him on the table, but she wasn't there. He wasn't extremely worried about this, as he just assumed she went to town to visit friends. He figured she'd be home eventually, so he just started working on chores around the house. But that's when James Farmer showed up. James ordered Patrick to leave the premises and to not touch anything because Sarah sold the house and all of the belongings to them. He told Patrick that if he had any questions about it, he could take it up with the county clerk's office. Of course, Pat didn't believe a word he said. You see, he previously heard rumors going around town that Sarah had sold the homes, and he questioned her about it. She immediately replied that she had done no such thing and had no plans to do so anytime soon. But Patrick had no choice. The documents were there. He gathered a few of his things and then he went to stay at a friend's house. Sarah was still nowhere to be found. Obviously, Patrick was distraught over the situation as he couldn't find his wife, and now his tenants were moving into his own home. So he called an attorney, and the attorney contacted authorities, and it wasn't long until investigators showed up at the house. The last time Sarah was seen was by a neighbor, Mrs. Baker. She was raking leaves around 10 a.m. on April 23rd. She claimed that she saw Sarah dressed as though she was heading to town, but noticed she was walking over to the farmer's residence. Although she did not see her enter the property, she assumed she did. Investigators did a thorough search of the grounds, and they found a bloody coat that was wedged between the bed and a wall. They also found an axe in the yard, and in the pantry they came across 2 trunks stacked one on top of each other, with a rancid smell lingering in the area. When investigators asked Mary who the trunks belonged to, she said the one on top was hers and the one on the bottom was James's. James then yelled, "That's a damn lie! The top one is mine, the bottom one yours." Mary then admitted that that was the truth. Officers asked what was in the trunk, and she said it was full of rags and boxes. But the trunk was awful heavy considering that to be the contents. If that wasn't suspicious enough, it was also wrapped in clothesline to keep it tied shut. When the officers removed the clothesline, they found the trunk was locked. Of course, when they asked Mary for a key, it magically disappeared. The sheriff had had enough, so he broke the lock, and as they opened the lid, they discovered a black skirt that was concealing all but the feet and legs of Sarah Brennan. Upon the discovery, Mary immediately accused her husband of committing the murder. She said she had nothing to do with it, but she did witness the body laying on the floor in the house, and then she claims that she's seen James stuffing her into the trunk. James didn't say a word, and they were both arrested. The investigation determined that the day Sarah was murdered, James was working and nowhere near the home. Mary had in fact attacked Sarah with an axe, striking her first on the side of the head, crushing her skull, and severing her ear. Then she repeatedly struck her in the face before putting her in the trunk. But James was still considered to be an accomplice to the crime. By the end of 1908, Mary and James were both found guilty of murder in the first degree. They were both sentenced to death. It wasn't until a day before Mary's execution that she admitted to the crime and cleared James. The only thing he knew about was the property transactions, of which he himself thought were legitimate. On March 29, 1909, at 5:45 a.m., Reverend Father Hickey greeted Mary in her cell. The priest whispered prayers to her as she clutched her Bible. The previous day, guards had trimmed Mary's hair, paving a direct course for the current to flow. The Reverend had full view of this as she bowed her head in prayer. It wasn't long until 2 women prison guards arrived, indicating that it was time. Mary stood up. She didn't say a word. It was almost as if she was in a trance. With a jingle of the keys and a few clicks of the lock, the large cell door swung open. It was 20 feet from the cell to the electric chair. The guards took their place on each side of Mary, a hand on each elbow. They were not forcing her, just guiding. Mary had her eyes closed. She concentrated on her prayers, whispering softly, intensely. The Reverend set the pace, walking slowly and praying louder and louder with each step. Mary didn't step. She dragged her heelless slippers over the cold stone floor. Mary entered the execution room where 12 witnesses were waiting for her. She refused to open her eyes, still whispering her prayers over and over. The guards helped to keep Mary stable and upright as the slippers were removed from Mary's feet. She took her final step as she was being positioned into the electric chair. A large strap around her waist, one on each arm bound tight to the chair. The skirt moved to the side as her legs were clamped down, her bare feet laying flat on the metal plate hooked to large twisted wires. A steel cap was fastened tight to her head. The guards and the warden stepped aside. The Reverend continued to pray, although his words came out breathlessly and his voice shaken. At 6:15 a.m., the warden gave the command. Mary, through clenched teeth, said her final prayer. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, have mercy on me," and the lever was thrown. I told you you'd get goosebumps. Leave me a comment. Tell me how well I did. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and thanks for listening.